The rain had been falling since dawn, drumming gently against the windows of number 9 Wellington Lane. Inside, Beatrice Langley sat in her usual armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket the color of ash. The kettle whistled quietly in the kitchen, but she made no move to rise. Her eyes were fixed on the window. For nearly 40 years, Beatrice had lived alone in the narrow stone house. The curtains were always drawn halfway, just enough to see the lane but not be seen. At 77, her world had grown small and quiet, filled with memories that crept like ivy along the walls. She had her rituals. A cup of Earl Grey at 7. Crosswords by 9. A walk to the corner shop on Thursdays, never speaking more than was necessary. No one visited. No one called. That was the way she preferred it. Until this morning. When she drew the curtain as usual, there it was, something strange on the windowsill. A ribbon, pale blue, tied into a loose bow. The satin was faded, but unmistakably familiar. Beatrice stared at it for several seconds before slowly opening the window. The ribbon fluttered in the wind like a forgotten whisper. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. It was the same ribbon her sister Eleanor used to wear in her hair. Eleanor, with her wild laugh and ink-stained fingers. Eleanor, who had vanished one summer day in 1963 and was never seen again. Beatrice clutched the ribbon in her palm and stepped back from the window. The house, once so still, now felt heavy with presence. She looked around as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. But no one came. She placed the ribbon on the mantel, beside the clock that had long since stopped ticking. Then, she made her tea and sat, staring at the rain, the ribbon, and the silence that no longer felt quite so empty. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of something old. Something lost. 2 days passed without incident. Beatrice tried to convince herself that the ribbon had been nothing more than a coincidence, a child's toy, perhaps, blown by the wind. But deep down, the feeling would not leave her. It sat beneath her skin like a chill. On the morning of the 3rd day, she opened the curtain again. There, resting in the exact same spot as before, was a tiny wooden horse. Its legs were uneven, the paint chipped, and one eye had faded completely. But the shape, the weight of it in her memory, it was unmistakable. Beatrice stepped back and let the curtain fall shut. That horse had once belonged to Eleanor. It had been carved by their father from scraps of oak. Beatrice remembered how her sister used to carry it everywhere, pretending it was her steed as she galloped around the garden, hair flying, shouting stories to the birds. She had not seen that toy in over 50 years. Her hands were cold as she picked it up and brought it inside. She placed it next to the ribbon, staring at the two objects as if they might begin to speak. For the rest of the day, she avoided the window. She turned on the wireless, let the crackling music play, and tried to lose herself in a jigsaw puzzle. But the presence of the horse was impossible to ignore. It was like a breath at her neck, a shadow in the corner of her eye. That evening, unable to resist, she climbed into the attic. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mothballs. Boxes lined the edges, most untouched since the 1970s. She opened one, then another, searching for something she wasn't sure existed anymore. And then, beneath a stack of old sheet music and broken frames, she found a photograph. 2 girls in a garden. Beatrice, barely 10, clutching a skipping rope. Eleanor beside her, holding the wooden horse and wearing that very same blue ribbon in her curls. Beatrice sat down on the attic floor. The silence was deep, pressing in from every direction. That horse and ribbon hadn't been seen in decades. They had vanished along with Eleanor. Yet now, both had returned. And someone had placed them at her window. The morning fog hung low over Wellington Lane, cloaking the cobblestones in a dull grey. Beatrice awoke early, not from habit, but from unease. She had barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Eleanor's face, blurred by time, but still young, still smiling. She didn't open the curtains straight away. Instead, she made tea, her movements stiff and careful. The kettle hissed like a whisper in the quiet kitchen. She set the cup down and walked slowly to the window, heart thudding louder than the ticking of the kitchen clock. When she pulled the curtain back, she gasped. A third object had appeared. It was a small, crumpled piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, held in place by a pebble. Beatrice opened the window and reached for it, her fingers clumsy with dread. She unfolded the paper. On it was a drawing, done in blue crayon. 2 stick figures, one with curly hair, the other holding a skipping rope. Above them, a lopsided sun beamed down, and beneath, a single word in uneven handwriting. Sisters. Beatrice stared at it for a long time. She remembered that drawing. It had once hung on the fridge when she and Eleanor were still children. She had drawn it one afternoon after school, and Eleanor had proudly pinned it up. It had disappeared not long after Eleanor did. She sank into her chair, the paper trembling in her hands. This wasn't a prank. It couldn't be. These were not random items. They were hers, Eleanor's, theirs. Each one loaded with memory, each one carrying a weight too specific to be accidental. Someone had these things. Someone knew. She rose and checked the front step. No footprints. No letters. No sign of anyone. But when she looked across the road, something caught her eye. Number 12, the old Forsyth place, long empty and nearly falling apart. A curtain moved. Just a flicker, as if someone had been watching. Beatrice held the drawing to her chest and stepped back inside. She closed the door and bolted it. Then, she picked up the wooden horse and the ribbon, placing them beside the crayon drawing on the mantel. 3 objects. 3 pieces of a life she had tried to forget. And a 4th day was coming. The next morning arrived with a sky the color of lead. Rain fell in thin, slanted sheets, tapping steadily against the windows of number 9. Beatrice woke early again, her thoughts as restless as the weather. She didn't even hesitate this time. She walked straight to the window and drew the curtain aside. There was nothing. No ribbon. No toy. No paper. She stared for a long while, her breath clouding the glass. For a strange moment, she felt disappointed. As if the absence meant the thread had been cut, the quiet mystery unraveled too soon. Then she saw it. Not outside, but inside. On the hallway floor, just past the front door, something small and dark. She turned slowly, her slippers silent against the wooden boards. It was a key. Worn, old, and unmistakably familiar. She bent down and picked it up. It was the key to the attic. But she already had the attic key, it hung by the back door, exactly where it always had. She checked it, just to be sure. 2 keys. Identical, but only one had been there the day before. She held the new one tightly in her palm and looked towards the staircase. Later that morning, wrapped in her shawl, she climbed the stairs again. This time, she took both keys. She unlocked the attic door and pushed it open. Dust swirled in the dim light. The room was just as she'd left it. Boxes, cobwebs, the old rocking chair near the window. Nothing seemed out of place. Except one of the boxes she had opened days earlier now sat in the middle of the floor. She hadn't left it there. Her breath caught in her throat. She knelt beside it and opened the lid. Inside were folded pieces of paper, tied with a string. A bundle of letters, worn at the edges. And on the top envelope, in faded ink, the handwriting that stopped her heart. To be, from Ellie. Beatrice sat back, the key still clenched in her hand. Her eyes burned, her chest tight. These were Eleanor's letters. She hadn't seen them in decades. In fact, she never remembered receiving them at all. She untied the string with shaking fingers. Inside, each envelope held a letter dated after Eleanor had gone missing. Some were short, some rambling, but all filled with longing, apologies, and sorrow. One line repeated itself again and again. "I'm trying to come home." Beatrice read them until the grey outside turned to dusk. Her tears fell freely now, not from fear, but from the ache of years lost. She had thought Eleanor was simply gone, vanished. But these letters proved otherwise. Someone had hidden them. Someone had kept them all this time. And someone had placed them in the attic, just in time for her to find them. The following morning was unusually still. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. Beatrice stood at the front window, staring across at number 12. The house looked unchanged, crumbling stonework, ivy curling up its sides, one shutter hanging half off the hinge. Yet something about it now felt charged. Like it was waiting. She had lived opposite number 12 for over 30 years, and in all that time, it had remained empty. The Forsyths had moved out long ago, and no one had moved in. Occasionally, "For sale" sign appeared and faded. But the house remained, quiet and watching. Yesterday's flicker of a curtain had disturbed something deep within her. The way the key had appeared. The letters. The drawing. It all pointed to that place. By mid-morning, curiosity had overtaken fear. She put on her coat, tucked the second attic key into her pocket, and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled of damp leaves and old stone. Her footsteps echoed on the quiet lane as she crossed over. Number 12's gate creaked loudly as she pushed it open. The front door was shut, paint peeling in long, curling strips. She raised her hand to knock, though she had no plan for what she would say. Before she could touch the door, it opened. A man stood there, tall, lean, perhaps in his early 40s, with eyes the same blue-grey as a stormy sea. His hair was dark and unkempt, and he wore a jumper that looked too thin for the weather. He seemed unsurprised to see her. "Miss Langley," he said gently. Beatrice froze. "How do you know my name?" "I think you should come in," he replied, stepping aside. Her heart pounded as she crossed the threshold. Inside, the house was dim and cold. Dust hung in the air like breath. Yet it wasn't entirely abandoned. A lamp glowed faintly in the corner. A kettle sat on the stove. Books lined one wall, and in the center of the room, a table held something that stopped her cold. It was the photograph from the attic. The one of her and Eleanor in the garden. Next to it lay the ribbon, the wooden horse, and the drawing. Neatly arranged. Reverently kept. Beatrice turned to the man. "Who are you?" He hesitated. "My name is Michael," he said. I think you knew my mother." Beatrice stared. "Your mother?" He looked down, then back at her. Her name was Eleanor Briggs. Beatrice sat in the armchair across from Michael, hands folded in her lap, the edges of her scarf trembling against her chin. The fire in the hearth had long gone cold, but she felt flushed, as though every corner of the room was pressing in. Michael poured tea into 2 chipped mugs and handed her one without speaking. His hands, she noticed, were steady. "She told me about you," he said at last. But not until the end. Beatrice didn't answer. She stared into her tea, unsure if her hands would hold the cup or drop it. "I was 10 when she first mentioned your name," Michael continued. "B. That's what she called you." She spoke it like a secret. Something precious, but broken. Beatrice finally looked up. Why didn't she ever come back? Michael's jaw tightened. He set his cup down, careful not to let it clatter. She tried. After she left in '63, she went north. Things didn't go well. She struggled. Moved from place to place. Lost people. Lost herself. Beatrice closed her eyes. The silence between them felt fragile, like thin ice. She wrote the letters, Michael added, his voice quieter now. All of them. But she never had the courage to post them. Not after the first was returned unopened. Beatrice's heart ached. She thought you hated her. Thought you blamed her for what happened with your parents. For leaving. For the accident. Beatrice gripped the mug tightly. I didn't hate her. I never did. I was angry. Hurt. But I never stopped wondering. Michael nodded slowly. She knew. Near the end, she knew. That's why she sent me. Beatrice frowned. What do you mean? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the cover worn smooth by years of use. He opened it and showed her the first page. In neat, looping script. To Michael, go to number 9. Find B. She needs to know everything. She gave me this before she passed, he said. It took me months to come here. I didn't know how. But I found the key, the letters, everything she saved. Beatrice felt her chest tighten. You brought them to the window. Yes, he said. One each day. I thought it might prepare you. I didn't want to knock until I was sure. She reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. For the first time in days, her tears didn't sting. They flowed freely, unhidden. She remembered me, Beatrice whispered. Michael's voice was thick. Every day. They sat in silence, not as strangers, but as two people standing in the quiet space between memory and forgiveness. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The day after the conversation, Beatrice awoke to a sky washed pale with early light. She hadn't dreamt, not of the garden, not of Eleanor, not of the summer that tore them apart. There was only a calm stillness, like a deep exhale after a long cry. She dressed slowly, carefully, each movement thoughtful. Then, for the first time in many years, she unlocked the front door not just to collect the post or water the flowers, but to leave. Michael was already waiting by the gate. He had a small bundle in his hands, wrapped in a faded wool scarf. I found one more, he said as she approached. It was tucked inside her old music case. She always said she'd finish the melody someday. Beatrice took the bundle and unwrapped it. Inside was a single letter. The envelope was yellowed, brittle at the edges, and slightly warped by time. Her name, B, was written on the front in Eleanor's looping, unmistakable hand. She hesitated, then opened it. The paper crackled softly. Michael stepped away, giving her space. She read silently, her lips moving just slightly as her eyes scanned the words. My dearest B. I've written so many letters to you in my mind. None of them ever felt enough. I was too young to understand how badly I broke things. I wanted to run, and in doing so, I ran from you, my sister, my anchor. But you were always the brave one. You stayed. You endured. I wanted to come home. I tried, so many times. But shame is a heavy thing. It builds its own walls, and I couldn't climb over mine. I hope Michael finds you. I hope he brings you these pieces of me. If he has, then it means I'm finally home in the only way I can be. Forgive me, if you can. With all my love. Ellie. Beatrice stood still for a long time, the letter pressed gently to her chest. Her eyes were wet again, but she did not cry the way she had before. I forgive her, she said quietly. Michael nodded, his face unreadable, but his voice steady. I think she knew. They walked together back to number 9. Beatrice didn't rush. Each step felt like a return, to herself, to her sister, to something long buried but not forgotten. That afternoon, she placed the letter in a wooden box on the mantel, beside the ribbon, the horse, the drawing, and the other letters. The fireplace crackled again for the first time in years. Weeks passed. October crept towards November, and with it came crisp winds and amber leaves dancing along Wellington Lane. Number 9, once a silent and sealed place, had begun to change. Neighbors who had forgotten the woman in the ivy-covered house started nodding as they passed. Some even stopped to chat. The curtains no longer stayed drawn all day. Light returned to the front room. The fire, too, became a constant companion. Michael came often, usually with stories about Eleanor. Beatrice listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes quiet, sometimes just letting the sound of her sister's name fill the room like an old song. One evening, just before dusk, Beatrice opened the window. The sky had turned soft and gold. The air smelt of peat smoke and distant frost. Across the street, number 12 stood still and dark, its purpose now complete. Michael had moved on. He left her a note and a promise to return, but she suspected he would find his own path, just as his mother had. Beatrice sat in the armchair by the fire and looked at the mantel. The wooden horse. The blue ribbon. The crayon drawing. The letters. And beside them, the last envelope, now resting unopened since that day. Not a letter. But a photograph. She had slipped it inside herself, quietly, on the night of the last fire. In the photo, 2 girls stood beneath a crooked apple tree. One with long, wild hair and a crooked smile. The other, smaller, softer, with a skipping rope in one hand and the world in the other. She looked out the window again. A breeze stirred the curtain. And for the first time in a very long time, Beatrice Langley smiled.